The 1960s had changed America. The nuclear family of the 1950s was a memory, and the 1970s promised more turmoil than the end of the 60s, which was no short order. Tobe Hooper and Kim Henkel grabbed a camera, $140,000, some fellow classmates, and they made a movie. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre was much more than just an exploitation film. Right from the beginning, the filmmakers always wanted to say something with this film. Today is a particularly opportune time to talk about 1974's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, because it shares very much in common with this year's Best Picture winner, Parasite. Both films are a criticism of social norms, and both films use two distinctly different families to explore those norms. But back in 1974, certainly there was nothing like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre for Hooper or Henkel to base their work on. The closest they came was a news story from Life magazine about serial killer Ed Gein. There are no body parts in the photos that the magazine ran, but the general disarray, the unspeakable uncleanliness of that farmhouse spoke to some great horrors. Combine that with the words in the articles which described human hearts and teacups, and you quickly start to be able to envision all the horrors that those photos only insinuate. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre operates on an extremely similar level. The filmmakers didn't place much gore in the film, but we do, with our minds. The Vietnam War, the assassinations of John Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr., the political corruption, the hippie movement, cities on fire on news broadcasts, and fire hoses being turned on American citizens. This was the cultural environment that gave birth to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre every bit as much as those photos of the Gein house. But there was more, too. A silent, unapproachable fear that was wrapped up in a question of where the society was going, whether there could even be a future in a world where Russia and America were at loggerheads with nuclear weapons. It was a time of extreme paranoia, and a lot of that paranoia turned inwards. We didn't have to look very far, let alone across the globe to the Soviet Union, in order to see our biggest fear. Very often, our fears brought us right to our next-door neighbors. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is, at its core, a film about two families. The good family, it's a family that consists of a brother and sister and their friends. They operate as a family unit, squabbling, arguing, making fun of each other. And there does seem to be an underlying love, very underlying, but there doesn't seem to be as much respect as you'd expect. On the other hand, we have a degraded cannibal family living in rural Texas. They're grave robbers, cannibals, and murderers. But they operate as a family unit as well. 3 men living in a house with some semblance of order to their own disorder. Both of these are American families, one taken to an absolute extreme, the other on its way to that extreme. There is no 1950s nuclear family on screen in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Even the briefly seen locals are either alcoholic or mentally deranged. It's America in freefall on display. This is America before the punk rock explosion, before Reagan, before the fall of the Soviet Union. This is America that didn't know its future anymore. In just a few short years, John Lennon would be shot dead and added to the list of martyrs. But at this point there was the feeling that there were no saviors left, that everything was running on fumes, that society was falling apart. As the film opens, our normal family are on their way to see whether their grandfather's grave has been robbed. The news reports suggest that bodies have been stolen, and at the beginning of the film, the viewer sees a distorted human corpse propped up on a monument. Sally and Franklin don't seem overly disturbed by their investigation. They seem, if anything, a little bit bored. There's no sense that this grave robbing was a real affront to them. Leatherface's family, on the other hand, have much more basic concerns. The family's trying to provide itself with meals, a roof over its head, and perhaps some entertainment. That the entertainment comes in the form of an unwilling dinner guest is unfortunate, but is it really so different than our society? Hooper and Henkel have crafted an extremely subversive film in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and its use of nature documentary-like frankness and rough editing and a disturbing color palette only serves to heighten the already elevated mood of the film. What we're seeing is a film about decay. Decay of morals, decay of bodies, decay of society. It's a film that asks the viewer to watch and not be able to root. Although Sally occupies the role of the final girl in the film, she doesn't have any of the typical markers of sympathy that we usually expect. She's not a virginal Laurie Strode, by any means. She seems argumentative with her handicapped brother, she seems dismissive, she also seems like a real person. And that's why we root for her more than anything else. The monsters of this film are unnervingly real too, even if they are an extreme exaggeration of the world we live in. We can see in them the decay all around us. Or at least that's how it played in the 70s. In today's world, we look back on this film with a little bit of an alien eye. It's not the world we're living in now. There's a lot more order. I think there's a bigger sense of where we're going as a society. And although it's not all positive, there's an acceptance and even a familiarity with that journey that wasn't there in the 1970s. Texas Chainsaw Massacre continues to endure because it is the story of America. Setting it in Texas, perhaps in some ways the most American state in the country, the most extreme, exaggerated sense of Americana. The film ultimately is holding a mirror up to us as viewers and asking us, do you like what you see? The answer is almost certainly not yes. However, it's a film that is hypnotic. It's impossible not to watch, impossible not to respect, and ultimately, I believe, impossible not, as a horror fan, to love. It accomplishes all of these things without ever preaching to its audience, without ever suggesting to its audience that they are looking deep into the soul of America. This is backdrop, this is subtext, this is the psychological underpinnings that go through all of us simply because we live here at this time in this society. And that is the best work. That is what cinema should always be all about.